In this episode of the podcast, I sit down with Nick Riley of High Minded Humboldt. We talk about how he made his way out to Humboldt County, fell in love with the area, and became immersed in the cannabis industry. We get into what Humboldt was like in the early days, some of the biggest misconceptions around cannabis, how the industry has evolved through the legalization, where it stands today, and what Nick sees for the future. For anyone interested in the cannabis industry or just cannabis in general, this is a must listen. I hope you enjoy.
I got a new band out there. It's kind of like half covers, half originals that, we mess around and play locally, benefits and stuff. So that's nice. But yeah, as I get older, I get roped into being the sound guy, even though I was never that when I was younger. But now I realize I'm like, oh, I am the one that has the equipment and knows what to do more than anyone else.
Yeah. You ever get back together with Nick Riley and the All-Stars? Didn't you get like
we've done
relatively
a couple
recently? Yeah.
Yeah, we've done a couple things. I'm trying to think of the last time. Actually, the last time we played was I did a little like party for my 40th.
Okay, I remember
Like,
about that.
Cancer free for now, as I put
Yeah.
it, and 40th, and we did a little bit. But prior to that, we had done one like almost every year around Christmas time when I'd go home, and then it just kind of fell off, and we haven't done it in a while. So
we just saw Hootie. Well, no, this was last year. Hootie and the Blowfish had their 30th year anniversary tour.
Oh, wow.
And I think they hadn't been on tour for a while. So
yeah. No, it's fine. I hope it's something that keeps going the rest of my life, a little thing here and there.
But yeah, just for listeners, why don't you just talk a little bit about your background, from Cleveland, family from Syracuse.
Yeah.
So you do have some upstate connection.
Yeah, are we letting everyone know that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I was born in Connecticut and then lived in Syracuse pretty quickly for, I forget how long that was, maybe 4 years. And then moved to Cleveland, grew up in Cleveland, involved in music stuff, band stuff, a lot of kind of underground venues and, shows and events and stuff like that. And then kind of, always tangentially involved in the cannabis world, if you will. And
this is early 2000s.
Yeah, basically early 2000s.
Still kind of,
illegal.
Yeah.
But in Ohio, it definitely was, to be honest.
Yeah.
But then, just honestly, one day, a buddy of mine who was traveling the country hit me up and was just like, hey, I found this cool spot in Northern California I think you should come check it out. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm kind of, hitting a stale spot here in Cleveland. I'll just come out for a visit. And next thing you know.
How old were you?
30. I had just turned 30.
Okay, so you've been in Cleveland that whole time.
Yeah, well, no, I left and I moved to Boston twice for about a year each time. Okay. Once for a girl, once for college. Neither one worked out. So I ended up back in Cleveland pretty quickly. And, the draw of playing with your friends and bands and stuff like that was pretty strong. Actually, something that'll tie into my story later. The first time I moved to Boston was in 2000. And I ended up seeing a guy in the newspaper with a Cleveland Brown shirt on. And he was running a record label. And it was a little story in the Weekly Rag about this record label called Big Wheel Recreation. And I just called the guy up and said, hey, are you from Cleveland? I see you're wearing a brown shirt. And he goes, no. I was like, oh, well, do you need an intern? I'd love to come down and help out. And so I went down and ended up working for him for about a year and, interned and then kind of worked on a smaller level. And they kind of packed up and moved their operation out to LA. And I kind of lost touch with the guy.
Did you consider going out there with him? Or was it not really an opportunity?
A split minute, but it was, like I said, it was kind of one of those, do I want to work in this world with other people's music and things, which was fun, the business side of it. And then I realized I just wanted to go back to Cleveland and play with the guys I grew up with. The band I played in the most, called Film Strip, was with two brothers, Matt and Dave Taha, that we basically grew up as brothers. They always called me the third Taha brother. Yeah. And so that was really the draw of going back there, was I wanted to do my own thing, not just follow somebody else.
You were relatively young in 2000, right? You were.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was actually 17 when I moved out to Boston that first time. Yeah. And then kind of bounced back and then tried it again and then bounced back. And did the band thing for a real long time.
Traveled for a bit.
Yeah,
Went on some tours.
And I will say that was something that maybe possibly was fueled by some cannabis interaction. It's very hard and expensive to be a DIY band on the road. I think we saw you a couple times in that.
Yeah,
but
I remember at Albany, you came and played
exactly.
a show. That was fun. Yeah.
But we did all that ourselves. No label, no booking agent, none of that stuff. So it was kind of more that scrappy DIY style setup. And so was the label actually that I worked for in Boston, which is why I loved it so much. Kind of this more, again, DIY, do it yourself, don't rely on other people, create what you want to see type of approach. Kind of brought that over into the cannabis world a little bit. And then when my buddy called me and, said, hey, you should come check out this thing. Like I said, I had just turned 30 and this isn't me saying this. This is really a thought I had at the time. I said to myself, you're 30 now. You should either maybe stop smoking every day or go all in. I just had this idea in my head of like, it's been very meaningful for you. I always thought it was more than just, a drug or something to do to, enjoy yourself, that it really had more of a health, spiritual, cultural, kind of benefit. And so I literally remember telling myself like, all right, you got to go one way or the other. And my buddy called me up and said, come check it out. I'm staying on a weed farm in Northern California. Took that as a sign.
What year was this?
This was
13?
actually 2012 that he told me that. And then within a month, January 2013, I had popped out there for 2 weeks, ended up sitting in a trim chair, learning the whole culture. Because as much as I was into smoking and, kind of the obvious culture of it, I really had no idea the history of Northern California and Humboldt and kind of the, underground industry that had developed. And so I didn't know that there was a job that you could get paid to do where you go sit in a cabin in the middle of the woods and trim weed all day and get paid a decent wage.
I say it paid pretty well, yeah.
At that time it did.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I just started doing that as much as possible, and we would travel with the band in between and kind of paid for it. The band never really penciled out. And then just slowly but surely, I got hooked on the growing side of it. That was something I never really did when I was younger. One time, I used to work at a pet store forever, and they used to let us take home the returned items, open box, stuff like that. And I remember one summer, I got a tank that was slightly cracked, and then they returned like these reptile lights, and a few other things. I'm like, what I could do with this setup?
I can do something here.
Yeah. So I brought it all back to a friend's house, put it in the closet, didn't know what I was doing, and grew one little seedling like this. Didn't understand what stretch was or anything. So it literally has like one stem going all the way up and then 2 little leaves. And we're like, oh man, we did it. And then immediately it falls over and dies. So that was my one attempt, back east here at growing. But yeah, once I was out there and sitting in the chair and getting to know people in the world and the history of Humboldt, and I just, kind of was like, oh, what else you guys do? Oh, you're out in the garden growing. Like, I love being out in the garden. Like, can I help out? And within that first year, I was helping out and growing, and that started what became now, I don't know how you would define it, 14, 15 years of growing. So that's really what hooked me there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of a cool transition. He started a couple weeks. I mean, visiting there when I came to visit you a few years back, just being there is like, whoa, this place is cool. Cannabis aside.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just the area of the Redwoods, Northern California. I mean, there's no place like it in the country. Yeah. So just the landscape, just being there, you're kind of removed from a lot of like the city lifestyle, right? You're talking about gardening. It's, very like nature centric out there. So that alone is kind of a draw, especially, if that's something you're into and it's just a cool place to be. It's great weather.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of positives besides the cannabis, but then also if you are into cannabis, there's no better place to be, especially at that time.
Yeah, exactly. At that time, it was coming to the end of the heyday, if you will. But that was, the place to be, really. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's amazing, outdoor. You can be at the ocean, you can be in the mountains, and it's rural, but there's still a population there. It's not like completely devoid of people. And specifically in southern Humboldt County, because northern Humboldt has like couple cities, Eureka, Arcata. They're on a bay. There's an industry, old Victorian downtowns and stuff like that. And it's cool, big college. But Southern Humboldt is very rural, up in the mountains. And I think I was telling my mother this the other day. There is not another rural place in America I've ever been that has as much, I don't know how to describe it, almost like international culture and also just a different type of person that wants to live there. I mean, I love rural communities everywhere I go. They all have their charm. But this one, I was very surprised. You go into the one grocery store in town that has no stoplight and you'll hear 5 languages being spoke.
Interesting.
Because of the different people coming through. And then those people would end up sticking around. And so there would be these little enclaves. You'd go up one dirt road and it would be a bunch of Brazilians. You'd go up another dirt road and it would be a bunch of Argentinians and some Italians. And then we'd joke too, even within that, you'd have like, oh, all the mountain bikers who like to smoke, they got a little garden over there on that hill. The different types of people you can imagine that like to smoke, they kind of had their own little communities. So in addition to cannabis and this amazing, beautiful nature, honestly, what really kept me going back and eventually moving full time was the actual community, because it's a lot of older hippies that moved out of the city back in the 60s, 70s, early 80s, came up from San Francisco looking to get away, homesteading. They really wanted to kind of create their own new life up there. And cannabis wasn't really the main focus at all. I'm sure all of them smoked, but it was more of a, hey, we're here, we're already gardening, we're doing this, and no one's around. We could throw a couple pot plants in the backyard and, oh, wow, look, we have enough, we can sell it. Oh, wow, people pay a lot of money for that. We can use that to buy new, tools to build the next house that we're going to build, or the community center, or stuff like that. And they really created this kind of almost, I wouldn't call it utopian, but utopian leaning or looking forward type mindset of like, let's build a different kind of community here. And they succeeded in a lot of ways. They failed in a lot of ways, but they created this just very unique place that really just hit me for kind of respecting the right things, paying attention to your community and your neighbors, supporting things, even though we weren't they weren't necessarily paying taxes back then on what they were doing. They always say they tax themselves. So we have a really strong local volunteer fire department community. We have a couple local private schools that were set up. There's a radio station that's like one of the longest running, coolest underground radio stations in the country. We have like 1,000-person music venue that, every artist that smokes weed has probably come through and played at some point in time. And this is all in a town with literally no stoplights. So, and this was all built with cannabis money. And so it really was this little getaway from it all.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people would get behind using their tax dollars towards something that they actually can see being done when their local community and have it, actually choose what's being done.
Again, yeah,
I don't think it's a matter of paying tax. It's a matter of, all right, I'm paying taxes. What the heck's,
which is it going
it's fraud. It's going to federal. It's going wherever. You have no idea where your tax money's going.
Yeah, and that's a strong sentiment of a lot of the people out there. You get this real strong kind of, back to the land homesteading meets libertarian meets also hippie. There's always this story that I tell of pulling into the gas station one day when I was first there, a few years in, I guess, but big, huge dually truck, diesel truck pulls up, brand new, all the bells and whistles. It's got a coexist bumper sticker on the back of it. It has a Bernie bumper sticker, but it also has like an NRA bumper sticker and a Trump bumper sticker. And it's blasting like raunchy hip hop. And out walks an 80-year-old man with a ponytail and a tie-dye shirt on. And he's not performing for anyone. Like, this man is just being who he is. And that kind of struck me, again, adding to that kind of allure of like, oh, what is this place? This is very unique.
Yeah. That's so cool. This episode of Upstate Impact is brought to you by Renewal by Anderson of Central New York. It's Christmas in July, and for a limited time, you can save 20% off your entire project with no payments until Christmas 2026. And because you're listening to the Upstate Impact podcast, you'll receive an additional $500 off your entire project when you mention Upstate Impact during your free consultation. If you've been thinking about replacing your windows or doors, now is the perfect time. Schedule your free window and door inspection before July 31st by calling 315-422-3500. Again, that's 315-422-3500. Mention the Upstate Impact Podcast to receive your additional $500 off. Renewal by Anderson of Central New York, locally owned and operated, and proud to support the stories that make upstate New York great. When you started spending more time there, did you just realize whoa? Well, I mean, by the time you're saying you're towards the end of the heyday.
Yeah.
Right. So explain what the heyday was, because you're talking about the beginning, how it kind of started. Then obviously it became more cannabis focused because all of a sudden it became, a gold mine in a way, selling cannabis, distributing a lot of the cannabis that was throughout the United States.
Yeah. We call that the green rush.
Yes.
Era.
Yeah. So, and I've used that term on the podcast. Talk about that maybe, towards the beginning when you were there. What made it a green rush? Obviously there was a supply and demand factor there, but kind of talk about how that and what that did to the area.
I was pretty lucky when I first moved out there. When my buddy called me, he had kind of been there a couple times, and I won't sugarcoat it. Not everything out there is great. There's a bunch of, at the time, bad actors on terrible, environmentally destructive properties, treating people terribly and just trying to make money. And he, kind of worked for some of those guys trying to get to know the neighborhood. And, he didn't tell anybody about it. It was more like, I'm not bringing anyone into this. And then he found a guy that we started working for that, was a upstanding member of the community and all these things, and realized, oh, there's, kind of this different way to do it. And that's
kind of like the old way, in a way.
Exactly. And that's why he gave me a call, because what this guy was doing was he was helping out a lot of the old timers. So when I first moved out there, what we would do is we would go to these small homesteads of these people that had been there since the 70s and 80s and were getting older, and we would grow their gardens for them, and we get a percentage of it in exchange. But I really did get kind of ushered in and taught by the old guard. So, and on top of that, the guy we were working for kind of had old school rules. You weren't supposed to bring anyone you didn't know for more than 3 years on the hill. You had to put your phone in your bag and leave it in your room before you walked into any of the work areas. It was really strict and really kind of like you were living 20 years earlier.
Well, it was illegal too.
Well,
is that part of it?
Well, at that time it was gray, we call it the medical era, the 215. Basically, you would go get a medical card and it would prescribe a certain amount of plants or different things, and you would post it in the garden, and people pushed the limits, and there wasn't really a good distribution and network for sales that was legal, but the grow was kind of, quasi-legal, if you will. And so, again, most of these people weren't trying to be outlaw, illegal, in that way. Maybe culturally they thought of themselves as outlaws, but really they wanted to, participate to some degree. And so this was like the in-between era. So I was able to kind of see that, learn from these older guys that had moved out there, to do more of the homesteading kind of hippie life. But at the same time, like you said, we kind of watched our neighbors around us as we got to know more people go into this green rush mentality. And that was really a combination of, I think, the laxness of that gray market medical time. They had kind of stopped doing very large busts like they had been doing in the 80s and 90s. There was a program called CAMP, Campaign Against Marijuana Planting, and it was federally funded with the state. It was military helicopters, people jumping out of them with machine guns and raiding small family farms. I mean, it was, there's so many books and movies and everything about it. Yeah, there's just so much there. Trauma and, government overreach and everything you could imagine. But this was the time when they were kind of like, okay, it's quasi-legal, we're leaving it alone. And some bad actors definitely moved in and blew it up. They would just bulldoze an entire homestead that they bought from somebody who had moved on and just put in giant greenhouses and grow as much as they possibly could, and just for money, and then they disappear for half the year and go to, Costa Rica or something. I was able to see that kind of comparison between the different ways to approach it, and luckily didn't really get sucked into that green rush, even though on paper I am the green rush. I'm a guy from the East Coast who moved out there and, was making money and using it to do the other things I wanted. But, over time, again, the nature, the beauty, the community just seeped in, and it became home in a way. It was interesting. Those might have been the best times, the best of both worlds, because eventually there was Prop 64. I think I got that right. I always forget the numbers, but the legalization recreational passed in California. And at first, while sounding promising, has been nothing but the worst. It really has been like, I think a lot of places look at California now and say, this is the model you don't follow as far as how to legalize.
Were they the first? There was a
No,
Denver?
Colorado was the first. I want to say California was the first to maybe really get close, but it actually didn't pass the first couple times that they pushed it. And then Colorado, and then in Washington.
That's right.
And then Oregon and California, I don't remember exactly who went first, but they kind of happened around the same time. But California was definitely the first one to really try to bring it into, the regulatory structures, the permitting, the tax. I think Colorado and Washington were a little more lax at the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a whole story unto itself if you want to go in there. There was like some backdoor dealings with the soon-to-be governor last minute, and they just pulled the rug out from all the small farmers, and it just wasn't what it was supposed to be. So since then, it's been interesting. The Green Rush days are well over. The only people left out there now are the ones that really want to be there, whether for the community, the nature, or the cannabis, which there's less of those that are there just for that these days. But the ones that are, good people and doing it for the right reasons for the most part. And we're just all trying to hang on,
Well, you're talking about bad actors. I mean, they came out with that Netflix documentary, which is probably,
you're teeing me up for something good that I forgot to say earlier, but
was it Murder Mountain?
Murder Mountain. And I'll give you that story. So the first 2 episodes of Murder Mountain are okay. It's great shots with drones of the nature and the beauty and the rivers and everything. And that part of it's amazing to see on your TV on Netflix, or tell your family to watch when you go back home, kind of stuff. But then you can almost see it in the show. They interview the sheriff, and at a certain point, it's like blah, 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 up on a spot called Murder Mountain, or like the locals call Murder Mountain. And it's almost like a record scratch for the producers of the show. You could tell they were just like, wait, what? And they changed the direction of the documentary after that. So the first 2 episodes were filmed under the name Last Black Market Harvest. And that's how they got some of these older guys to go give their interviews and kind of talk about the story of bringing the seeds back for the first time, and, the community building these houses together naked. And, it's a great story. I actually know one of the guys that used to work for him too. But they just sensationalized it, and they took this one story. The whole story they're telling there is actually about a meth deal gone wrong. But they left that part out. They made it sound like it was about cannabis.
Cannabis related, yeah.
And so if you rewatch it at any point in time and just remind yourself, oh, they're talking about meth, it makes more sense. And they're talking about one area. I think every city has that area, where the drugs are bad. And it's kind of the same out there. Like, it's called Murder Mountain because it is a very shady spot up this one dirt road that a lot of bad actors go. But it's not what I would call representative of the area at all. And so the community really felt a blow from that, kind of betrayed. I know for a fact that they paid one of the guys money to lie about a bunch of things. He was like a local thief, been caught a bunch of times. Producers found him on the street and said, hey, pretend to be a dealer. We'll get you a hotel room, like reenact this for us. So it's all fake. It's really not real.
Like a lot of the stuff that you watch.
Yes, for sure. I know. But luckily, it kind of lit this fire with me and my wife, Christy, and a few other people, a good friend of mine who doesn't live there, but does a lot of cannabis media work and stuff. And we wanted to put out something that was going to counter that. I always wanted something I could show my family and be like, this is where I live. And so recently we were able to do that. A little plug here. It came out on 4/20 of this year, but we helped create part of this documentary series called 4/20 Quick Hits. It was produced by Jimmy Kimmel, and it's like 4 little documentary stories about, not always talked about cannabis topics. They're all very good. But one of them is called Ganjasaurus Rex. And it's the story of this terrible B movie made by the locals in southern Humboldt County back in the late 80s. And it's as terribly awesome as you could imagine. They really put a lot of time and effort into it. They had like a local theater group, be the actors. They produced it. They tried to release it. I think they had a deal with like B-movie VHS stores back in the day around the country. It got into a few of them, but it really pandered. I think there's a podcast that once called it like the worst movie of all time.
Which also probably makes it that much more entertaining.
A little more intriguing.
Yeah.
But the story is really endearing because it is the story of the people that are in it. It's the story of farmers growing against government suppression and, this Ganjosaurus Rex character that's basically a Godzilla ripoff, comes out of the ocean and, loves cannabis sequoia, they call it. It's like a new cannabis strain that grows as tall as the redwood trees. That's the plot. And so it's just a great way to start talking about what happened back then, both the good and the bad. And so we've been talking about it for years, and eventually we were able to get it onto the desk of Kimmelot, Jimmy Kimmel's production company, and they loved it, and they agreed to produce it. So it's a little 20-minute documentary about the making of the movie and kind of the history behind it. And it's got a bunch of archival footage of the actual raids happening back in the day, combined with, we had an event at our big community center and got everyone back together to do a showing of it.
So they had like current
Exactly. So it's
happening
current
too.
and the backstory and everything. So nowadays, when people are like, "Oh, Murder Mountain," I'll say, "Okay, first 2 episodes are okay. Forget the rest, and then go watch on Hulu 420 Quick Hits, Ganjosaurus Rex." And that is more the community that I live in.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool that at least now there's something you can point to.
Exactly.
Because, you kind of knew. I remember at the time when it came out, my brother would tell me, you were saying like it's pretty dramatic. It's not representative at all. Very anecdotal little story of a small part. And like you said, any city's going to have something like that. It's just the nature of living in America.
Yeah. And I'm not one of those like everything's rosy all the time. Like there's definitely some bad actors, to bring it back to what you were saying. I don't know. They're kind of few and far between these days, like I said, but even at the time, they were just these isolated communities. And so it was really hit or miss which ones you got into. It's a cash crop. It's illegal. I'm not exaggerating when I say probably within the county, every major organized crime group you can imagine had some connection to it. We all were aware of that, and you just watched what you did and where you went.
I say any close calls, any issues with authorities when you were
not there? For me, really.
I'm sure you heard stories.
More, running from helicopters in the garden, it's more that side of things. But again, it's, you hear this in different stories about organized crime, but if you just stick to yourself and do your thing, most of the time it's fine. It wasn't like random crime, if you will. So I think
organized.
Yeah, exactly. So if you stuck to yourself and didn't get involved with those people, it was okay. They'd still come to, the community parties. You'd see their crew and stuff like that, and everyone coexisted. But it definitely was a little tense during those times when there was a lot of that kind of activity because people didn't really want that there. But what are you going to do about it?
Cannabis itself, is there like an advantage to growing it up in Humboldt, or was it kind of just the place that ultimately was good to hide it initially? Is that a combo of both?
Yes, and
yeah.
It really. So I don't think the people who moved up there purposely did this, but it happens to be the perfect climate for growing cannabis. It basically models I forget if it's the 42nd latitude or something, but it's in the kind of same area that when you follow the line to Morocco, Afghanistan, Pakistan, these traditional growing areas, we have that very similar climate where technically Humboldt is the beginning of a temperate rainforest, the Pacific Northwest, where we have a rainy season and a dry season. So, the short of it is you get, kind of 6 months on, 6 months off. And that's great because then you're not dealing with rains on your buds, creating mold, issues like that. But then specifically being up in the mountains where we are, a lot of the cannabis, especially now, more quote unquote indica, I hate that term, but leaning plants were developed in these mountainous areas where it was a lot of sun during the day and even heat during the day. But then at night, it would cool down. And so you get these swings in temperature. And when you get swings in temperature between the night and the day, that's really when you get the best buds. It brings out a lot more of the terpenes. The structure is different. The new purple hues that everyone wants on their weed, that comes from that kind of thing. It really models those more traditional areas. I've been lucky enough to go to Morocco a few times and visit family farms there and kind of see how they do things. And it blew me away how similar it was, both in climate, terrain, and then even like the culture. As like drastically different as it is, there's still something about, growing weed in the hills that makes a certain kind of person, and that certain kind of person is the same all across the world.
Is it legal there?
It's an interesting line. So there, they do have a medical program. It's kind of like California back in the day, where everyone has a little bit of a medical permit, but there's not an established industry by any means.
Yeah.
And historically, Morocco is basically what Humboldt is to America, producing all of the weed that people have smoked for decades. But in Morocco, it's been centuries of providing it for Europe. Spain grows a little bit, especially now these days. Italy used to grow a little bit back in the day, the more Mediterranean climate. But Morocco is the producer for all of Europe, legal, illegal, whatever. And it started, I'm going to get my dates wrong, but basically there was a invasion by the Spanish, and there's a group that lives in the mountains, the Rif Mountains there, called the Berbers, that were kind of an ethnically different group than the rest of Morocco, kind of kept to themselves. But the king wanted their help. They had guns, basically. There's like a history of old Berber guns up there. So they had like a standing little army, and they wanted them to come down and help the Moroccan king fight off the Spanish. So they did. And in exchange, the king said, okay, we'll let you keep growing your cannabis up in the hills there and just kind of leave you alone. It was like an implicit, acceptance of it. You couldn't do it anywhere else. If you get caught smoking it in the cities, it's a big deal, da-da-da. Nowadays, everyone knows it's what happened. It's basically a never-ending green rush up there now. But if you're Moroccan and you're walking around Tangier smoking a hash joint, you're going to get in trouble. If you're a white tourist, they do not care.
Interesting.
So it's racist, and it doesn't make you feel good in a certain way when you're there, but it's just so accepted because it's been centuries of this happening, and everyone knows, and they want the tourist money and all that. But these days, I think they maybe last year or 2 years ago, there was the first fully legal shipment of cannabis product from Morocco to the German recreational market. And that's kind of the channels that are being set up now. Similar to California, where everyone knew the market and the industry existed, and they're just moving it from the black market to the gray market into the white market. It's not creating something new, and you're not going to be able to create it from scratch. You have to bring in those players. Hopefully the good players that were doing it the right way and always kind of wanted to be more a part of it. But it'll be interesting to see what shakes out there. It's very interesting. It's not the same dynamics as here because of, again, the centuries of doing it. It's just built into it.
Yeah. The reason I kind of asked that too is like, is it an ideal climate? I kind of compare it to wine, right? Obviously, Northern California wine in Sonoma and Napa is enjoyed everywhere, across the world, especially in the U.S.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate as cannabis is rolled out, and obviously it's still federally illegal. You technically can't have marijuana or cannabis from Humboldt County in New York, right? Even though it's legal in both.
Yeah.
They can't sell it here, and I think it's illegal to bring it here. I mean, there's
100%.
I'm sure there's ways, but my point being is like, when is it going to be a point where, okay, this is the ideal climate to enjoy outdoor cannabis, with the hot days, cold nights, and it's like people want that, they crave it. I think about like breweries, a California brewery that we love. When is that going to be this case with cannabis? Does it have to be federally legal?
Yes.
Even then, will the state be like, all right, we'll open it up to anywhere, because is California then going to dominate the market? And it's like, oh, now all the New York farmers are kind of screwed.
I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head, honestly. That's the crux of everything happening right now. I had different opinions 5 years ago. As we all know, the current political climate is a little crazy when it comes to any subject or policy. So who knows? But a couple short answers. Yes, it has to be federally legal in order to move state to state. Technically, the one thing that the federal government has, and when they made marijuana illegal, marijuana at the time they called it illegal, was it's like the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act. And they basically said you need a tax stamp from the federal government to move across state lines because the federal government has jurisdiction over interstate commerce. And they just refused to ever give anyone a tax stamp. And so it was effectively illegal. This was before the scheduling and all that kind of stuff. So they have a stranglehold on that. They won't let it happen. I think with the new medical and the rescheduling, certain people might be able to do it. But again, it'll be highly controlled. So in the meantime, what's happened is a lot of states have passed things that within their state legislatures that say when the federal government allows it, we will allow it. So I know like Oregon and I'm pretty sure California have done that, where they say the moment the federal government says, yes, we already have our laws in place, you can start shipping. And the benefit of that is, I think, underrated for anyone who isn't involved in the industry, because it's like, oh, you grow in New York and get New York. But California has overproduced its entire life. I mean, we grow more cannabis than California will ever consume. Always has been that way.
Yeah.
And similar to
for a while, because it was supplying the
exactly.
US with,
yeah.
what,
but
90%?
Even now, it's still way more than the legal market would ever go. And it's an open secret. California still provides most of the cannabis in the country, through illegal channels. And again, it's one of those people kind of look the other way because they just know it's going to happen. People are going to consume it, and they just try to deal with making the repercussions of that as little as possible. So,
but if someone were to stop you on the street and I had California bud,
well, they would never be able to tell. I mean, there's a famous kind of story in the industry of there's this large farm in California now called Glass House. A lot of people don't like them. They're just big mega corporation style grow. And the CEO of it, who was actually, I believe, an ex-police officer, was in New York in a dispensary maybe a year or two ago when things first changed. And he's like, oh, I see Glass House Farms up on the shelf there. I wonder how did they get my product to here? And like he was outing himself or something. Like obviously he somehow let it get there, whether he did so purposely or not. Somebody backdoored his products and got them to New York. And so it was just this weird example of like what's happening and how do you deal with that? And I don't know. But back to something that you said, I think the importance there is that is where I think we need to be. My little spiel I tell people all the time is I want cannabis to be beer and wine. I don't want it to be cigarettes. There's no craft cigarettes, really. I mean, there's maybe a couple now, but they're probably owned by Philip Morris and RJ Reynolds. It's just not that kind of industry. There's just the three big players, that's it. Whereas even, wine's even better because there's not as many big players, but just take beer. You got your three big companies that dominate 2/3 of the market, but then you have a million now microbreweries, even outside of like your local one, but like, Sam Adams is, pretty big these days, and they've kind of moved on, and done things. But there's even other ones like that still have interstate commerce between them, but they take up that third and they share it and they get a higher price point because it's more craft. And, that's what I want to see. I want to be able to, get the best of both worlds in that sense. You really can't do that the way it's set up now because you need someone like me growing on a small farm, homestead, in the mountains of Humboldt to be able to sell a, kind of subscription box of our best strains to the former wine mom in upstate New York. Once that can happen, we'll be able to sustain ourselves out there. I think that culture will get into the mainstream and people will accept it. And it won't just be this, what I call like, I don't know. I like to think the cannabis market, as most people see, is kind of like the 12-year-old. They still think like cool cartoon characters, sideways baseball hat, like these kind of like things that, they're cool, but it's not a matured culture, if you will. And really, a lot of people that I know that partake in it, myself included, that's more where we feel comfortable. It's not just this other drug that you can use or something. And so being able to develop that part of an industry, I think would drastically change the way everything works. And I think it wouldn't necessarily hurt a state like New York, because New York is never going to be able to grow enough to supply all of even New York City, let alone the rest of the state. It's just not. I mean, think about wine. New York is probably second in wine growth to California, or wine growing, maybe close. Washington, Oregon have a lot too. But
that's kind of my point too, is that like I can't imagine if we could only drink New York wine, it would be tough.
Exactly.
Because it's like there's, white wine's good here.
Yeah.
Right, the Finger Lakes.
Yeah,
I don't like white wine. A lot of people don't. They like, red wine. That like.
And that one's a little more drastic difference. You could tell. I mean, you could still grow different types of good, cannabis here in New York and stuff. And indoor, there's a lot of indoor. We can have that conversation, indoor versus outdoor and stuff. But I do think that there will always be a demand for certain states that are set up more for the climate. The regulatory distribution networks, things like that I think California is setting itself up for. And there'll be exporting states, and then there'll be importing states. And then, certain states will probably never develop fully flushed out cultivation. I mean, I'll say this and be proven wrong, but like Mississippi, I really doubt they're ever gonna, invest in, millions of acres of grow space, indoor or
if anything, it'll be a local guy with probably an
Exactly.
indoor facility. Hey, you want to buy local, which is
Exactly.
always a demand for that.
Yeah, which is kind of like your local, microbrewery type of setup.
Exactly.
But then there'll be other states that are a little half and half. I think like Michigan, New York, states that kind of got a jump start by having a legal framework too, to kind of get some things worked out, kinks worked out. And then when it becomes nationally legal, or at least state to state legal, they'll be able to kind of do a little bit of export, a little bit of import, and then a little bit of, your local microbrew style. So that'd be the perfect world in my mind.
Yeah. And it would just open more things up too, to like, we're going out to Napa in September. You could go to Humboldt, and stay, and there would be some sort of, all right, we'll go to a couple different farms out there, have that tasting experience or whatever, however you would consume it. But there'd be just so, like you're saying, all these microbreweries around. It's like, oh, we could go to the local indoor place, check out, see the grow, try a couple different products. Like it could be more of an experience than it is now, where it's really just kind of, you're just buying it now and having your own experience, I guess, with it.
There's a few people trying to do things like that. I mean, I'll say like that's something my wife and I have tried to do on a smaller
I know you've
scale.
talked about exactly. I'm just saying it's probably hard right now, just given all these limitations.
I mean, to the point where, so there's a guy I know who runs cannabis tours out of the Bay, and he drives up through Sonoma County and Mendocino County, and Humboldt won't let him drive into Humboldt and give any cannabis tours legally. Nothing to do with sales, nothing to do with consumption. They just have a local law that says it has to be a Humboldt company that gives tours to Humboldt farms. So there's a guy in Humboldt that does it, and they work together, but it's just one of those silly restrictions. Like they could both exist without that restriction. Like you should be able to bring people from San Francisco up to check out the offerings of Humboldt County. But right now he's got to stop in Mendocino. And, there's some great cannabis and farmers in Mendocino as part of the Emerald Triangle. But as someone in Humboldt, it's kind of annoying. And then also, we live up a dirt road, off grid. It's gorgeous. It's a great maintained dirt road. We pay a bunch of road fees to keep it that way. And, but we will never get a permit to allow legal visitation of a tour. The law right now is set up as if every tour is going to be a giant tour bus. So it literally says your driveway has to be paved and have like 40-foot turnouts every 50 feet, so a bus could turn around, like stuff like that you're just,
it's not going to happen.
It's not matching the reality on the ground.
Yeah.
There's some that are lucky to be close to the road that have been able to, legally do these things. But everyone else is kind of, when you can, here and there, you do these private experiences. My wife is a cannabis chef. She does pop-ups here and there. Again, it's kind of a quasi gray area, but it's like a lot of event-based things. It's technically private, so it's technically legal, but you can't really advertise as much or things like that. Or, the age-old thing that I think Washington, D.C. made famous, which is you couldn't sell cannabis, so you would sell T-shirts and get a free eighth of cannabis. So people kind of do that.
I
It's like
remember
you're
that
selling
here.
Yeah, exactly.
Here, buy one of these stickers.
Exactly. So it's like, oh, pay for the dinner and it'll come with some offerings, stuff like that.
I think part of it too is just like, imagine right after Prohibition with alcohol. Can't imagine just like microbrews succeeding.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? People just legal. People are just like, oh, I can finally have a Bud Light or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like they don't have the sophistication to be like, and they really enjoy that experience yet, right? It kind of comes with time.
Yeah.
So like it really has to progress just to really open that up to more of a broader audience throughout the country and throughout the world, I guess.
No, I couldn't agree more. And back to that's what I mean. Like right now, as much as I love, going into the coolest, hippest new dispensary with, the newest drops by all these people with names that sound like graffiti gangs, I love it. I love the product. I love the culture, but it's not for everyone. And it's not everything that I want. I really bring it back to that. Like once you can get this, former wine mom in upstate New York, this mythical person I always use, you hear stories of people who are like, oh, I used to drink a lot and now I'm going to smoke a little bit and drink less and, think about it differently. They're not going to want to go into those kind of establishments. That's not something appealing to them. But if you go this wine model where it's like a gorgeous backyard area with, some like tasting tables and, you can walk through the garden and see the buds in full bloom and, things like just being able to stare at the plant and then smoke the thing that came off of that plant while you're looking at it, like last year's harvest, this year's stuff like that. I think it really gets into almost like the agro-tourism side of things as well. And that's where you can bring in more than just the product and you can actually bring in the culture and the experience and the community. And that's where Humboldt, I think, other places too, but Humboldt really has that edge is that we've always had that. It's just been very private. Everything you described about going to wine country and kind of having this great experience touring around, it's kind of what I had when I moved there back in the day. It's just I didn't know it existed. Even as someone who was a heavy smoker and participated in the industry, I had no idea it was like that. And within the first couple of years, I'd tasted 100 strains I never knew existed. I saw 5 different farms that all grow in completely different styles, everyone swears that theirs is the best because they make this special mix that you've never seen before that they learned from the guy that they first moved there, just these great stories that just bring you into the experience.
It's being talked about more, how you experience anything, right? Yeah. You talk about smoking cigarettes, right? In Europe, why do they still live into their 90s smoking cigarettes their whole lives? Because how they experience it. It's not like this bad habit that, they kind of frowned upon. You have to go outside. It's like they really enjoy that experience.
Yeah.
And so you could really say that about anything, even wine, right? Like drinking alcohol as like a drug is different than how you experience it. If it's really a passion of yours and you can, like you said, you can see, the grapes being grown, you actually get that whole experience and you understand it. And it's more that helps as far as like the longevity of doing a habit like that, right? It doesn't, maybe bring out the down effects.
Yeah,
the bad side effects, like they're starting to go, some studies on that, and obviously we'll see how that plays out. But to your point, I think the wine mom avatar that you've created is like, they still think of it as a drug, right? Even though it is technically legal, right? It's like, you walk in, it's kind of these crazy things going on, even some of the packaging, which is cool to a lot of people, but to some, it's like, I don't know, they feel out of place.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. So I think, as it matures, they'll have all different types, right? They have like, the 4 local alcohol, as an example that you're marketing to college kids and young kids, but then you also have the wine, the sophisticated more that you're marketing to other people.
Yeah.
And there's so many different strands of alcohol and different ways you can consume it. Same with cannabis.
Yeah. That you used my favorite example is, there's a difference between chugging a fifth of whiskey and having a nice glass of wine, both in effect, taste, and experience. And, I agree that experience is a large part of everything. I mean, I don't smoke tobacco, but when I go visit my friends in Europe, they smoke hash with tobacco. They don't smoke flower for the most part. So I smoke it, and it's different. It feels different. I mean, I can't describe it. And I think part of it is that different drugs are different. Everyone knows that. They're, good effect, bad effect. But cannabis is a psychedelic. I think a lot of people don't think about that enough. Maybe they're reminded when they eat too many edibles that it can, have psychedelic effects. But one of the tried and true kind of mantras of psychedelic culture is dose setting. And I think it's more apparent than in almost any other class of drugs where the dose matters, how much you take, who you are too, like, big guy can drink more than a small person, things like that affect the dose. And then there's the setting, which is where you are. So if you're sitting at home alone watching TV, drinking versus out at a party, it is going to make you feel different. But with psychedelics, it's, kind of amplified to the nth degree where you are. And then the last part that everyone always forgets is the set, which is not such an obvious name, but it means your mindset. And it's so where are you at, and, what happened to you that day down to like, where are you in your life? Are you going to rethink every choice you ever made? Are you going to be, reaffirming what you've already decided? These kind of larger questions that when you're in certain places, you're kind of allowed or encouraged to explore more than others. You go into a big open conference kind of, showroom area and everyone's got booths and they're all just smoking and it's loud and chatty and it's fun. It's not the same thing as, sitting in the woods in a hammock, watching, the birds fly by and the sun setting and just really enjoying a nice smoke. And it's just, like I said, it's amplified so much more when it comes to psychedelics, even though it's true. And it's the more, mild of the psychedelics, unless you're eating a lot of it.
Yeah,
but
it can be pretty.
Which is interesting. I'll throw a little thing out there. Most people don't know this, but when you eat cannabis, it turns the THC, or the delta-9 THC, the active chemical that gets you high, that I think everyone knows now, although it's more than that. It's all the chemicals, the terpenes, everything. But when you eat it, it actually processes through your liver and chemically changes the molecule to be almost identical to psilocybin, the active principle in magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
So that's why when you eat it, it actually is a different drug. And that's the most extreme example of that. But I think
doesn't mean when you eat a little bit, you're really going to feel like you're tripping on mushrooms.
No, not at all. I don't mean to say that. But even then,
but you can eat too much and really have,
and it's a very different experience than smoking it. And most people don't realize it's because it's a different chemical, and then getting into it a little bit, but like with the terpenes now and the different cannabinoids and the ratios between strains, I think a lot of people still don't understand that cannabis it can be 10 different drugs, even just in a flower form to smoke. There are certain strains that I smoke and I call it cleaning your house weed. You just immediately start doing things and almost feel a little like up from it. And then there's other strains you smoke. There we go. That's I can't tell you how many bags of Durban poison I wrote clean your house weed on when I gave them away. And then there's other ones where it's perfect for, a long day of work and all you want to do is relax on the couch and watch a dumb movie and something that's going to kind of knock you out a little bit, make you a little sleepy. And so people kind of have started with the indica sativa, which is really bad science, to be honest, to call it that, but I've accepted it because culturally it's how people understand the upweed, the downweed. But imagine the spectrum in between, because there really is this giant spectrum in between where some of the upweed can be very almost psychedelic and mind manifesting and, really get you thinking, or it could just be uppity and you're out playing sports or something. And some of the downweed can be the same way. It could just kind of make you not think about things, or it can make you think about things too much, and everything in between. And they're finding out that the terpenes and the other molecules involved in it really do affect the high and, back to what we're talking about, the experience of it. So, when you're thinking about it, it's like the experience of, again, the dose, which is kind of the product, the set, who you are, and the setting, where you are. And when you think about it that way, I think it just makes a lot more sense to a lot of people.
That's a good way to put it. Dose, setting. Can you imagine, being somewhere where you shouldn't be, not shouldn't be, but you know what I mean? It's really important to make sure you're in the right setting to really enjoy that experience and get out of it what you want.
Yeah. Because also I think a lot of people that have a negative view of cannabis that have tried it, I do think that most people should at least try it at one point in life. I mean, you can do what you want.
I have a story about
people
that,
try alcohol, but if you don't have the right dose and you're not in the right mindset and you're not in the right place, the same exact one little hit from the same thing could give you a different experience. And maybe you got a little paranoid and you didn't like it. And so you think it's always going to be that way.
Yeah. Well, when I was in Colorado. So I was coaching in Austin. We always did the Denver tournament, the Vail tournament. So the first year it became legal, 2015 or something.
Yeah.
I went to a dispensary, got some stuff. I got these like 5 milligram mints, and I was popping them like Skittles. And I kind of felt good, but it like barely felt it and whatever. We come back the next summer, and I was like, oh, I ate like 5 of those, no problem. And then we're like, oh, we got gummies. You know, they're 10 milligrams. She's like, that's the recommended dose. I'm like, oh, cool. So like I pop it before we go to dinner, and it's the coach, you know, some of the coaches, all the parents. At dinner, it was just hit me. I like had to like focus on breathing. I couldn't eat. All these parents are around, whose kids I'm coaching. I was like, I got to get out of here. Like
it's a classic story.
and I could have, you know, I've experienced enough marijuana up to that point that I could be like, all right, that's not how it always is. I can eat less, but like I can 100% see how people are like, I'm never doing that again.
Yep.
And so it's like, I mean, part of that is because who knows, each gummy could be different.
I was about to say, you're touching on another topic, which is again, something that, you know, not everyone loves the legal market or the industrialization or, you know, standardization of things. But one of the benefits is now most people understand what 10 milligrams means. And most people do the right way these days, I think, at least in the white markets, where 10 milligrams is 10 milligrams. And you'll get that variation with setting and everything, but it is the same dose. Yeah. Whereas even in, you know, California medical days, same thing. I'd be like same brand, same package, same store, 1 week apart. And these things are 5 times as strong as the last batch, even though they both say 10 milligrams. And so being able to kind of standardize at least that part of it and then get people to understand what a dose means. Like I know people that know, oh, I take exactly 2.75 milligrams. Can't take 3, 2.75. Yeah. I'm perfect.
Half a gummy. Like some people, they have the best time of their life. They eat a full one, they're having a miserable time.
Yeah. And now that they can do that every time, they're not scared, you know, to get that random like, ooh.
Well, can you imagine being like, all right, that might be 1 shot of whiskey or it might be 10.
Exactly.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Just take it. We'll see.
Take it. Yeah. And you know, your college days or something, that might be something you're willing to try.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just for most people, that's not how you do it.
So to me, that's actually beyond all the other stuff, just from almost more like public health perspective to, you know, outside of keeping people out of jail for cannabis. I think the next one is definitely that you can understand what it's going to do to you, you know, in that kind of controlled way of like, okay, I understand, you know, oh, this is really strong weed. THC percentages and everything, but most people understand if you go buy a 30% THC, it's going to hit you definitely different than say the 15% CBD mix, you know, stuff like that. So as we get more legal and more studies, I think that'll just be dialed in a way that will make people way more comfortable.
For sure. Nick, talk about Humboldt if anyone was interested, if they want to maybe come out. Is there ways to visit? Is there, you know, just to get the experience?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but my wife and I do, we have it's a farm management company called High Minded Humboldt that I run. And we, you know, kind of grow, we consult on grows, products, different things like that. But then we also have our homestead. And we have an extra little tree house that's kind of set off on the side of the hill.
Stayed there.
As you have stayed.
Quite an experience. It's awesome.
And so, yeah, we do offer people to come out. You know, you could hit me up on email, highmindedhumboldt@gmail. We do little private catered experiences if you want infused dinners or tours of other farms, or like another cousin of ours came out to visit and we had all these things planned. We were going to go all these places and, you know, take hikes to go to the ocean, all this. Came out to the farm, got into the treehouse, slept. The next morning he goes, is it okay if we just stay here the whole week? And I was like, oh yeah, that's great. You know, like come back again. We'll do all the other fun stuff. He's like, I just need a week of sitting here and smoking and relaxing and reading a book every day. And, you know, I think offering that experience along with the rest of it is something that currently in society too, I think a lot of people look for and need, you know, post-COVID in particular, it's just like, come out, clear your head, you know.
Well, they got that experience during COVID. I noticed that, like, you know, a lot of people shut down and they had that just downtime.
That's true.
It's nice to go back to that.
Yeah. And the downtime is different when you're, say, trapped inside your apartment all day.
True.
Or, different things like that. But yeah, luckily it was a little different in Humboldt during that time. We could still hang out outside and do the gardens and stuff. But yeah, just really taking that moment to kind of reflect on things. That's something I find cannabis is good for in general. So, but yeah, beyond that, I'd say just show up. Humboldt's really a welcoming place, despite what Murder Mountain tells you. There's a million great farms. There's a million great dispensaries. There's these days a pretty active online Instagram community of local farms and stuff. Hopefully someday we can, kind of have that nice tasting room, and really officially have people come out and experience what it is that we have out there. But until then, we do our best. And I don't know. I hope people just take a moment to think about things differently than they used to, that, there really is a different approach to the growing, the consuming, and it's something that I think Humboldt really pioneered and I hope doesn't get lost.
Awesome. Well said.
All right. Well,
thanks Nick.
Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Sweet.